By the time the lawyers were finished with it, a brand new skyscraper on some of the most valuable real estate in Las Vegas had become something almost no building ever becomes. It became evidence. 26 stories of blue glass and concrete on the corner of Las Vegas Boulevard, finished on the outside and never opened on the inside, sat frozen for years because one side of a lawsuit wanted to demolish it and the other side needed it left standing. The owner, one of the biggest casino companies in the world, said the tower was so badly built that it would collapse in an earthquake and had to come down for public safety. Its builder said that was nonsense, that the owner simply wanted an excuse to be rid of a hotel it no longer needed, and that knocking the building down would conveniently destroy the proof that the work inside had been sound. A judge sat in the middle of it, and so did the Nevada Supreme Court. More than 1,700 alleged defects, an inspector who admitted he had never read a set of engineering plans on his own, and a round of testing so aggressive that even the builder's own consultant eventually agreed the structure could no longer be saved. That tower had cost about $520 million, adjusted for inflation and for the rise in construction costs. And it never housed a single guest. Its pool was never filled. Its rooms were never furnished. For most of the years it stood on the Strip, it was covered in enormous advertisements for other people's restaurants, which earned it a nickname that followed it to the ground. What finally happened to that building, and why it could not be blown up like almost every other doomed tower in this city, is one of the more remarkable things ever to unfold in Las Vegas. And most of the people walking through the shopping center that occupies the site today have no idea it was ever there. Las Vegas, in the middle of the 2000s, was building at a pace that in hindsight looks close to delirious. MGM Mirage owned the Bellagio on one side of a wide stretch of the Strip and the Monte Carlo on the other, and between them sat 67 acres of the most valuable undeveloped land in the country, a good portion of it a parking lot. What the company proposed to put there contained no theme whatsoever, which in this city amounted to heresy. Where the Mirage had a volcano and the Luxor had a sphinx, CityCenter would have architecture. Raphael Vanoli, Cone Peterson Fox, Daniel Liebeskind, Helmut Jahn, and Norman Foster were all brought onto the same site, a roster that would have been ambitious for a museum campus and was unheard of for a casino development. Plans called for a 61-story hotel and casino with 4,000 rooms, 2 smaller hotels with no gaming floors at all, thousands of condominium residences, a retail district, and pedestrian bridges to stitch the whole thing into the rest of the boulevard. The budget started in the region of $4 billion and kept climbing. By the time anyone opened a door, the accepted figure was $8.5 billion, which made CityCenter the largest privately financed development in the history of the United States. To carry a number that size, MGM Mirage sold half the project to Dubai World, the investment arm of the government of Dubai, which committed $2.7 billion to the development and separately spent roughly $1.7 billion buying MGM stock at prices in the low 80s. Ground broke in 2006. Every assumption underneath that arrangement was about to be tested by events nobody in the room had priced in. The northeast corner of the site, where Harmon Avenue meets Las Vegas Boulevard, went to Norman Foster. Foster is among the most decorated architects alive, responsible for the reconstructed Reichstag in Berlin and the Hong Kong and Shanghai bank headquarters. And this was to be his Las Vegas debut. What he drew for that corner was an elliptical tower of highly reflective blue glass, curved rather than boxy, rising 49 stories, with a swimming pool deck cantilevered roughly 100 feet above the sidewalk. In the earliest documents, the project carried the placeholder name Lifestyle Hotel, which tells you a fair amount about how it was conceived before anyone settled on what it actually was. It eventually became the Harmon Hotel, Spa, and Residences, named after the street beneath it. 400 hotel rooms were planned, along with 207 private condominiums, ranging from about 1,000 square feet up to 3,700. No casino floor was included anywhere in the building, which on the Las Vegas Strip is close to a statement of principle. And the hotel was slated to join an association called the Leading Hotels of the World. Day-to-day operations went to the Light Group, the nightlife company run by Andrew Sasson, whose principal partner told reporters the Harmon would define a new era of sustainable luxury, and described it as an amalgamation of every great lifestyle experience in the world, only better. Buyers believed it. 88 of the 207 condominiums were reserved by people who put down 20% deposits, real money committed to rooms inside a tower that was still a concrete frame. The pace at which all of this was going up deserves attention, because it turned out to matter enormously. CityCenter was rising inside a building boom on the Las Vegas Strip valued at something like $32 billion, with around 20 cranes over the site on a given day, and thousands of tradesmen working stacked above one another inside building frames, around the clock, against a fixed opening date that had already been announced to the public. Across that boom, construction workers were dying at a rate of roughly 1 every 6 weeks. 12 died on strip projects over an 18-month stretch, several of them at CityCenter itself. In March of 2008, the Las Vegas Sun began publishing an investigation into it, and reporter Alexandra Berzon documented how the rush to build quickly on congested sites was producing safety shortcuts, along with unusually comfortable relationships between the regulators and the builders they were supposed to be policing. In June of 2008, iron workers walked off the job at both CityCenter and the neighboring Cosmopolitan, and refused to go back until Perini Building Company, the general contractor on both projects, agreed to safety improvements. The following year, the Sun won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service for that reporting. Congressional hearings followed. Nevada's Occupational Safety Agency was overhauled, and the deaths stopped. That June date is worth holding on to, because the reinforcing steel inside the Harmon was already buried in concrete by then, and the problem with it would surface about a month later. Whether the two failures shared a root cause is not something any court ever established. What can be said is that they happened on the same site, under the same contractor, in the same months, on a project where the schedule was not negotiable. Perini Building Company held the general contract on the Harmon, as it did across much of CityCenter. And Perini brought in subcontractors, among them a San Diego firm called Pacific Coast Steel, responsible for placing the reinforcing steel. Rebar is the skeleton of a concrete high-rise. Concrete carries compression beautifully and resists being pulled or bent very poorly. So steel bars are laid inside the forms in patterns specified down to the inch by structural engineers. And then concrete is poured over them and the arrangement becomes permanent. On a tower like this one, particular attention goes to link beams, the short segments of concrete that tie shear walls to one another, and are designed to absorb the violence of an earthquake by flexing instead of snapping. Get the steel wrong inside a link beam, and the finished building looks completely ordinary from every angle. You cannot see it from the corridor. You cannot see it from the street. Detecting it requires breaking the concrete open. According to the Clark County Building Department investigation that followed, reinforcing steel on the Harmon was installed improperly inside link beams across 15 separate floors. In places, the bars ended up so badly positioned that steel protruded from the finished concrete floor, where nothing should have been sticking out at all. Rather than being reported, it was cut off with a torch. Steel meant to hold the building together during an earthquake was sawed away because it was in the wrong place and someone wanted the problem gone. Workers reportedly moved reinforcing bars without approval from the structural engineer, which on a project of this scale sits somewhere between a serious violation and an impossibility. None of that should have survived a single day of inspection, which is where the story stops being an accident and starts becoming difficult to explain. Third-party inspection was handled by a firm called Converse Consultants, whose people were on site for the specific purpose of confirming that the steel matched the approved drawings before concrete went over it. Between March and July of 2008, Converse inspectors issued dozens of daily reports certifying compliance. County records put the figure at 62 such notices. Every one of them was wrong. One of the inspectors, a man named Joseph Glenn Lorente, later told county officials something that is hard to read without wincing. He held a civil engineering degree, but he had never read a set of engineering plans without assistance before taking this job. On previous projects, other inspectors had always helped him interpret the drawings. The Harmon was the first time he was expected to do it alone. He acknowledged personally inspecting floors 17 through 20 and signing off on items that did not comply with the approved construction documents. He also said he had been unaware the steel placement failed to match the plans, and that he never observed anyone cutting bars with a torch. The county's own audit language on how this happened deserves to be quoted almost exactly, because it pointedly refuses to pick a lane. Investigators wrote that the failure may have resulted from misinterpretation, incompetence, a mistake, or something more nefarious. That final phrase sat in an official government document, unresolved, and it stayed unresolved for the rest of the story. The problem was finally caught in July of 2008, and it was not the inspectors who caught it. Halcrow Yoles, the structural engineering firm on the project, identified the defective work, and the county investigation followed from there. By that point, 15 stories were already standing with the flawed steel sealed inside them, and concrete does not come apart politely. Reaching a link beam on the 11th floor of a live structural frame means demolishing finished work above and around it. Then doing the same at dozens of other locations, in the middle of an active construction site, on a tower already climbing above the strip. Work stopped. Engineers began drafting a redesign. And while that was happening, the outside world came apart. Lehman Brothers collapsed in September of 2008. Credit markets seized, and Las Vegas turned out to be sitting almost precisely on the fault line of the crash. MGM stock had peaked near $99 in 2007. By March of 2009, it was trading at $1.87. The company was carrying more than $13 billion of debt and needed cash urgently. So it sold Treasure Island to Phil Ruffin for a sum approaching $800 million. Dubai World sued its own partner over cost overruns and alleged mismanagement, then went to its creditors asking for a standstill on $60 billion of its own obligations. The condominium market that was supposed to help fund CityCenter had simply ceased to exist. A half-built tower with defects buried in its lower floors was now attached to a company fighting for survival. In January of 2009, MGM made the decision that shaped everything afterward. The Harmon would not reach 49 stories. It would stop at 28 in the revised drawings. The entire residential component would be deleted, and the building would be completed as a hotel of 400 rooms and nothing more. The 88 buyers holding deposits were offered refunds or the opportunity to move into other CityCenter residences. The pool suspended above the boulevard, the penthouses, the spa, half the reason the building existed, all of it was canceled before a single wall was papered. What that decision actually meant became the central dispute of the following 6 years, because the two sides told irreconcilable stories about it. MGM said the tower was cut down because the work inside was defective and the upper floors could not safely be built on a compromised base. Perini said the reduction was a unilateral business decision driven by collapsing condominium sales and cash flow, and noted that MGM had acknowledged in early 2010 that the issues were fixable. Even the height of the finished shell became contested. Depending on which document you read, the Harmon standing on that corner was 26 stories, or 27, or 28. Court filings generally said 26. The county and the architects tended toward 28. Years of litigation and hundreds of millions of dollars, and the parties could not reliably agree on how tall the thing they were fighting over actually was. CityCenter opened without it. Vidara welcomed guests in early December of 2009, and Aria, the 4,000-room centerpiece, opened on the 16th of that month with fireworks and searchlights and a crowd stampeding onto the casino floor at midnight to test the old superstition that opening night is lucky. Crystals opened. The Mandarin Oriental opened. The Veer Towers leaned at their opposing angles over the whole complex. $8.5 billion of ambition landed in a city where visitor numbers were falling and room rates had dropped a quarter in a single year. And the architectural reviews were respectful, while the financial results were brutal. On the corner of Harmon Avenue, one building stood dark. Its exterior had actually been completed. The blue glass was on, the curtain wall was sealed, and from the sidewalk it looked like a hotel that could take reservations the following morning. Inside, there was nothing. No lobby, no corridors, no finished rooms, no working elevators, no plumbing terminating anywhere useful. A shell with a beautiful skin sat on one of the highest value street corners on Earth, and MGM had no way to open it and no legal ability to remove it. So they did the only thing available. They wrapped it. For the next several years, the Harmon wore vast printed advertisements for the restaurants, shows, and shops of the very complex it was supposed to anchor. Reports at the time put the cost of that wrap at around $1 million, and it earned the tower a name that stuck to it permanently: the most expensive billboard in the world. Whether MGM still wanted those 400 rooms is a question hanging over everything that followed. CityCenter opened into the worst Las Vegas market in decades and performed accordingly, posting heavy operating losses through its early years. In the first quarter of 2010, the parent company reported a loss of $96.7 million. A large share of it attributed to an $86 million write-down on CityCenter residences. Condominiums priced during the boom were being resold for a fraction of their original contracts. Dubai World's position deteriorated in every direction at once, having paid somewhere between $80 and $84 a share for MGM stock that would spend years trading in the teens, on top of billions committed to a development that was losing money. By any reasonable measure, the last thing the Strip needed at the end of 2009 was 400 additional hotel rooms, and Perini hammered that point relentlessly and in public. Its chief executive argued that shortening the tower had been a business decision, driven by collapsing condominium sales and cash flow, rather than by anything found in the concrete, and that MGM had acknowledged as much internally. MGM's answer was that a building which cannot survive an earthquake is unsafe, no matter how many rooms the city happens to need. Both of those things could be true at the same time, which is exactly what made the case impossible to resolve for so long. A defective building that its owner also had no commercial use for is a building with two completely separate reasons to disappear, and no clean way to establish which reason was actually driving the decision. Every argument that followed for the next 4 years was, underneath the engineering language, a fight over motive. Then the engineering reports began arriving, and the situation escalated from embarrassing to dangerous. In 2011, Weidlinger Associates, a firm hired by MGM, delivered a structural analysis concluding that the Harmon as constructed could collapse in a sufficiently powerful earthquake. The threshold that circulated publicly was a magnitude 7.7 event, and CityCenter would later argue in court that the odds of a quake capable of bringing the tower down occurring within 30 years ran to roughly 50%. Southern Nevada is not California, but it is not seismically inert either, and the structure under discussion was more than 20 stories of concrete, standing beside 2 operating luxury hotels, a shopping center, and pedestrian bridges carrying tens of thousands of people a day across Las Vegas Boulevard. In August of 2011, MGM announced it intended to implode the building. Clark County had already been pressing CityCenter to abate the hazard. A senior CityCenter executive described the tower in open court as a monument of construction defects. And then the general contractor stood up and said no. Perini insisted the building was fundamentally sound, that the defects were repairable, and that the repair could be completed for somewhere around $20 million. It also made a far sharper accusation, arguing that portions of the structural drawings, as designed and permitted, contained reinforcing steel arrangements that physically could not be installed as drawn. If that were true, responsibility shifted from the people holding the tools to the people holding the pencils. Underneath the safety argument sat a lawsuit of extraordinary size. Perini and several subcontractors had sued in 2010 over unpaid invoices, claiming they were owed somewhere between $190 and $230 million for work performed across CityCenter. CityCenter counterclaimed for construction defects, contending that everything spent on the Harmon had been wasted. Subcontractors compiled a list running past 1,700 alleged defects in the reinforcing steel alone. Combined, the claims approached $500 million, and the case landed before Clark County District Court Judge Elizabeth Gonzalez, who would spend years of her professional life inside it. This is the point where the Harmon stopped being a building in any ordinary sense. If the tower came down, the physical proof of what was actually inside those link beams came down with it. Perini and Pacific Coast Steel argued that demolition would hand CityCenter an insurmountable advantage, erasing the evidence of competent work while leaving jurors with a mental image of a structure so dangerous it had to be destroyed. CityCenter argued that enough had been documented for any trial to proceed, and that leaving a hazardous shell standing beside resorts full of tourists purely to preserve a litigation exhibit was indefensible. Both positions were coherent. Neither side could win without the other losing badly. The tactics grew accordingly baroque. At one point, Perini went to the Nevada Supreme Court, accusing CityCenter of improperly hiring expert public relations consultants, described in filings as spin doctors, to shape the opinions of the very Las Vegas residents who would later be summoned as jurors. In a city where a substantial share of any jury pool works for a casino company or is related to somebody who does. And through all of it, the building did exactly what it had been doing since 2009, which was nothing at all. Wearing advertisements for a steakhouse it did not contain. To prove a building is defective, you have to open it up. And opening it up damages it, and the damage becomes its own argument. CityCenter's structural expert, Gary Hart, examined 397 critical structural elements out of roughly 1,469 in the tower. He found all but one of them defective. That number is worth sitting with for a moment. Of nearly 400 structural components inspected inside a building erected by one of the largest contractors in America, exactly one passed. CityCenter wanted to extrapolate from that sample across the rest of the structure, which is ordinary statistical practice in defect litigation. In July of 2012, Gonzalez ruled that it could not, because the test locations had not been selected at random through what is known as a blind draw. Hart had chosen them using his own engineering judgment, targeting elements most critical to how the tower would behave under gravity, wind, and earthquake loads, which is a sound way to inspect a structure and a poor way to build a statistical sample. The ruling meant CityCenter could claim damages only for defects it had physically exposed, leaving roughly 3/4 of the building unproven, and it came attached to sanctions. So CityCenter went back in and tested more, well over 400 additional elements, stripping concrete off structural members to photograph what lay underneath. In April of 2013, an engineering firm working for Perini wrote to Clark County to report that this destructive testing had caused more damage than anticipated, and that the Harmon could no longer be repaired. The contractor that had spent 2 years insisting the tower was fixable watched its opponent's evidence gathering make it unfixable. The Nevada Supreme Court heard arguments in June of 2013 on 2 narrow questions: whether the extrapolation ruling was proper, and whether Gonzalez had improperly sanctioned MGM over the selection of test sites. In the closing seconds of his allotted time, CityCenter's attorney raised the letter from Perini's own consultant and told the justices there was no longer any dispute among the experts that something had to be done about the building. On the 23rd of August that year, Gonzalez approved demolition, acknowledging the public safety risk of a collapse. 3 months later, that approval was withdrawn over insurance complications. By then, the machinery of the case had reached a scale that sounds invented. 6,000 potential jurors were notified of the proceedings, from which a pool of roughly 600 was narrowed and issued questionnaires. Gonzalez's courtroom was physically remodeled to accommodate the technology and the sheer number of attorneys involved. Back in 2010, Nevada's Governor Jim Gibbons had personally tried to bring the two sides together and failed completely. It eventually fell to Clark County Chief Judge Jennifer Togliatti to broker a resolution, a process that consumed 15 months of meetings, phone calls, and negotiation. On the 5th of May 2014, a judge finally issued the order that allowed demolition to proceed. The Harmon had stood empty on the Strip for more than 5 years, and it had been under litigation for 4 of them. Las Vegas has a well-established way of killing a hotel. The city turned implosion into public theater decades ago, wiring towers with explosives and dropping them into their own footprints in front of cheering crowds. And the dunes, the sands, the landmark, and the stardust all went out that way, celebrated on the way down. The Harmon received none of that, denied its spectacle for the most mundane reason imaginable. It was hemmed in. The tower sat directly beside the shops at Crystal's, close to the Cosmopolitan, adjacent to pedestrian bridges spanning one of the busiest intersections in the western United States. Bringing it down with explosives was never realistically on the table. So the Harmon was disassembled instead. Crews began stripping scrap metal and interior materials in June of 2014. Protective structures went up over the sidewalks, a street-level walkway closed, and a tower crane arrived. Then, floor by floor, from the top down, the building was taken apart. The crane lowered slabs of concrete to the ground, one piece at a time. Dark mesh crept up the facade. Photographers documented the process month by month because the change was too gradual to notice otherwise. A skyscraper shrinking by inches while tourists walked underneath it holding drinks. 26 floors became 20, then 12, then 3. Reported cost of the deconstruction came to about $11.5 million, against earlier estimates of $30 million to implode it. The work ran for well over a year. On an MGM earnings call in August of 2015, Chief Executive Jim Murren told analysts the company had finished deconstructing the nightmare that was the Harmon. The lawsuit itself had already ended, and it ended in the most anticlimactic way available. On the 16th of December 2014, hours before opening statements were due in a jury trial expected to run more than a year, every party settled. Terms were confidential, but MGM filed notice with securities regulators disclosing that resolving the case would cost it roughly $173 million, with $153 million of that going to Perini. Around $72 million came from money already sitting in escrow from condominium sales elsewhere in CityCenter, which means deposits paid by people buying into the complex helped settle the bill for the building that never opened. The company that had spent years describing its own tower as a monument of defects wrote a very large check to the builder it blamed. Pacific Coast Steel, Converse Consultants, the engineers, the architects, and everyone else in the chain folded into the same confidential agreement, and the question of who was truly responsible for the steel inside those link beams got negotiated into silence rather than answered by a jury. 6 years of filings, appeals, sanctions, destructive testing, expert reports, and Supreme Court argument produced no verdict and no finding of fault, only a figure and a confidentiality clause. After the escrow money was applied, MGM's actual cash outlay came to roughly $101 million. All but one of the litigants folded into the deal. The judge who had presided over the wreckage for years called the colleague who brokered it a miracle worker on her way out of the courtroom, which is a fair description of persuading that many lawyers to stop on the morning they were finally allowed to start. The single thing every party agreed on by the end was that the building had to go. Unfinished towers in this city do sometimes get second lives, and that is the part of the Harmon's ending that lands hardest. A few miles north on the same boulevard, another blue glass skyscraper stood empty for even longer. The Fontainebleau began construction in 2007, reached roughly 70% completion, and stopped dead in mid-2009 when its lenders cut off financing and the project fell into bankruptcy. It had been scheduled to open that October. Instead, it sat dark for 14 years, passing through the hands of Carl Icahn, who bought it out of bankruptcy for around $150 million and never restarted the work. And then Stephen Witkoff and his partners, who paid $600 million, renamed it the Drew, and halted again when the pandemic arrived. In 2021, Jeffrey Sofer, one of the original developers, bought it back, restored the name, and finished it. The Fontainebleau Las Vegas opened on the 13th of December 2023 at a total development cost of $3.7 billion, carrying more than 3,600 rooms. And it is trading today. 16 years from groundbreaking to guests, and the building still got there in the end. The difference between those two towers has nothing to do with money or patience or the economy, all of which treated them about the same. One of them had a financial problem, and the other had a structural one. A stalled project can wait for better conditions to arrive. Defective reinforcing steel buried across 15 floors of concrete does not improve while you wait, and it does not become cheaper to reach. The Harmon is now taught as a case study in engineering ethics and construction oversight, cited in professional literature alongside far graver failures as an illustration of what happens when the layer of the system designed to catch mistakes stops working. The land did not sit empty for long, and what happened to it says as much about Las Vegas as anything that came before. In April of 2021, MGM Resorts and Dubai World sold the 2-acre parcel to Las Vegas developer Brett Torino and New York-based Flag Luxury Group for around $80 million. That works out to roughly $40 million an acre, a valuation higher than anything strip land reached during the bubble that preceded the crash. Torino and his partner Paul Canavos already owned Harmon Corner, a retail complex diagonally across the same intersection. What they built on the site is a 4-story shopping and dining center called 63, named according to Torino because both developers happened to be 63 years old when they came up with it. Ground broke in June of 2021, and the first tenants opened in April of 2023. It now holds an Ocean Prime Steakhouse, a restaurant fronted by the country musician Jason Aldean, a museum of illusions, and an immersive digital art attraction, all wrapped behind an enormous LED screen facing the boulevard. Something in the region of 240,000 square feet of retail occupies ground that was meant to carry 49 stories. The corner reserved for Norman Foster's Las Vegas debut instead holds a shopping center with a very large television on the front, and the crowds moving through it are standing on the foundations of the most expensive building in the modern history of the Strip, never to admit a guest. What makes the Harmon linger is that it never failed the way buildings are supposed to fail. It did not burn down, and it did not fall over. It stood on that corner for roughly 7 years, through weather and heavy construction next door and the constant low-grade shaking of a large city, and it held the entire time. Everything wrong with it was invisible, sealed in concrete across 15 floors, found eventually by an engineer rather than by any of the people paid to be watching. The mechanism designed to catch exactly this, a licensed inspector standing on the deck with the drawings in his hands, was staffed by a man who had never read a set of drawings alone, and he signed his name to compliance more than 60 times across 4 months. Everything that followed, the redesign, the canceled residences, the refunded buyers, the wrap, the earthquake reports, the courtroom rebuilt to hold the lawyers, the crane lowering the building onto trucks a slab at a time. All of it traces back to a mistake that took seconds to make and a torch to conceal. A hotel designed by one of the great living architects, financed by a casino empire and a sovereign wealth fund, sold as a new era of luxury, ended its existence as a legal exhibit nobody was allowed to touch. And the costliest part of the entire affair turned out to be the 6 years in which nobody could prove whether the building was safe to open. Thanks for sticking around all the way to the end of this one. If you're up for another, there's one of my videos on the screen right now.